Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, October 8th, 2021. Time for another show. This is mandatory. Wake up. It's time to go. Even if you haven't, let's say, finished your breakfast or taken all your vitamins or anything like that. Just randomly, in case that happened to you. I'm not saying it happened to me. I'm not saying I'm going to continue eating my breakfast on the air in the microphone either. But it could happen. There's a nice cup of tea waiting here. Some nice, interesting stuff, like a raspberry fruity tea. Seems like fun. And, cup of water nearby. I think I can live with that. And, there may or may not be a bowl of cereal that I might eat during the show or whatever. Anyway, exciting Friday to be alive, really. A lot going on here at the HQ, not all necessarily relevant to the radio, but that which is relevant to the radio show. Bill's morning tweet, the Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. There, good, we're done, right? No, Kagro X welcomes Ellie Zupnik, true, of Fix Our Senate, to answer the question that has vexed scholars for centuries. What the hell is going on over there in the Senate? Yes, well, that's a big subject today. We had a bit of a moment this past week, really, and yesterday in particular, and in getting ready for, posting the morning post for the show, had to kind of wait until late in the day to be sure about what was going on. And no one was really sure. As they began a vote, we discussed the whole setup of this on Thursday with Greg, that Mitch McConnell had decided to float this compromise idea, sort of compromise, a deal that, as he had it, would temporarily extend, I guess, the debt ceiling. Or I suppose did he ask for a vote on attaching a number to it? I didn't even know. The substance of it escaped me entirely because, of course, the issue for me was the procedure. And that's bad news because usually we were just complaining the last week about the way it gets covered by Capitol Hill reporters and political reporters as a game. And I guess we kind of fell into that trap a little bit, just trying to explain the procedure of things. But, I've put aside a few articles on it so we can just read and make sure we know what we're dealing with entirely. But, yes, so the deal that was offered from the McConnell camp was possibly in reaction, and this is what makes it so relevant to our special guest and our regular focus today, possibly to avoid the, I guess, inevitability of having to decide once and for all whether it was either the debt ceiling or fealty to the filibuster for Manchin and Sinema. They offered to a short-term hike on the debt ceiling so that we wouldn't hit default in mid-October, as has been estimated by the Treasury, but instead would put it off to about December, but also possibly, as Greg mentioned, with tax revenues beginning to come in at the end of the year, possibly even pushing it as far as January, but that we would have to do this all over again. And I guess, on the one hand, I'm sure that McConnell couldn't get Republican agreement to alleviate the problem long-term, so they would probably only agree to short-term, if he could get agreement at all. And they probably got the agreement because even the people who plan to vote against going forward with the plan probably knew it was, or the plan was for it to go ahead and get a vote and for cloture to be invoked if there were still objectors. But to extract us from the immediate problem of possible global financial meltdown. And as we said yesterday, used the term kick the can down the road. So the problem remains, crops up again for Democrats, crops up again in the beginning of an election year when they think it will cause a problem. And that was enough to satisfy the haters on the Republican side who just wanted to cause chaos. Well, we'll get to cause it again. So it's okay if we solve the problem now for the short term. And it sounded like it was going to work. And when McConnell floated it, I assumed that he was floating it knowing that he had some handle on where the Republican conference was, and that there would be, holdouts and people who just want to continue to create problems. But if he could get the commitment of 10 Republicans to vote for cloture, and then assuming that all of the Democrats vote for cloture if there was a filibuster still in the way. That is, if somebody objected to going forward with it with unanimous consent, for instance, and then they made a motion to proceed to this deal, but that objectors still insisted that they would demand a cloture vote, they would need to get their 60, of course, to invoke cloture and then therefore get us to a vote on the deal at some point. And they probably also had another deal in place, probably a unanimous consent request locking in. All right, well, rather than go through because time was of the essence and they wanted to get this thing done, they didn't go through the formal process of actually forcing it through, making a motion to proceed and having people get up and make speeches and attempt to filibuster it, and the majority leader filing for cloture on the motion to proceed, and therefore having to wait an entire calendar day between the day on which they file for cloture and then they can vote on cloture, and then having 30 post-cloture hours, which you can run out. I mean, it can take almost a whole week to get around to an actual vote on the underlying substance, even if you have the votes for cloture, which is one of the lingering problems with the filibuster. They more than likely, I can't really imagine any other way of doing it. So without even checking, I can tell you they probably entered into a unanimous consent agreement heading into it, just saying, rather than go through all that crap, why don't we just have the test vote of 60 votes on first have a unanimous consent request that the motion to proceed be immediately considered, but that it requires 60 votes for passage, for adoption, I guess, of the motion to proceed. And then you get all the benefits of the roadblock of the filibuster, but without the time spent on it. Something I used to call the painless filibuster early on in this whole 10-year fight to modify and or eliminate the filibuster. Painless filibuster because you basically just agree to, throw in the 60 vote barrier without all the excess wasting of hours, and nobody has to actually speak. So it's actually quite it's actually quite filthy that they do this. And simply agree, and that's all they can get agreement on. We'll agree to make it difficult to move on, but not time-consuming. Got to have 60 votes, and that's all we care about, and we don't really care about delaying things. Sometimes you can get an agreement on that, and then therefore move a proposal like this to the floor. Okay, tea break for sure on this one. I've been staring at this cup. Did everybody enjoy that as much as I did? See, now I have to decide whether to edit that out of the podcast. But now that I've mentioned it, I can't edit all of this out. So I'm stuck with it. All right. So let's see. The Hill's Morning Report is currently before me. We can check our work and see how we did here. The Hill's Morning Report presented by Facebook. Looking for some good PR. Well, it's not going to work, Facebook. Screw you. After high drama, Senate lifts debt limit. Okay. Who puts together the Hill's Morning Report? Why, it's Alexis, Semedinger and Al Weaver. Al has the easier name of the two there. Let's see. Oh, look at this. I love stuff that gets thrown together quickly in the morning. You make mistakes like this. It's okay. And at least you know that there's real people behind the production of this thing. Here is a picture of Mitch McConnell, unmasked, walking down the hallway, flanked by two people, I don't know who they are, who are wearing masks. And there's a caption to the photo, and you'll love this caption. Are you ready? It is Mitch McConnell, quote, width equals, quote, 580, quote, height equals, quote, 387, quote, data dash delta equals, quote, 2, quote, space, slash, close brackets. Or actually, that's the, that's the greater than sign. Not that. I use them as brackets for fun, but no. So there you go. Somebody has screwed that up, and we don't know what the caption was supposed to say. But we know how big the picture is. It's 580 pixels high, I guess, and 387 wide. Actually, I'm sorry, 580 wide. I was like, this looks rectangular. They got it the other way around. Okay, anyway. So, do we care about the rest of this stuff? The Senate on Thursday approved a short-term debt ceiling increase, setting the stage for the House to do so next week, so we haven't finished yet, and allow the U.S. not to default on its bills for the first time in history. That's awkwardly constructed. We usually don't default on our bills. This is the 200 and whatever time in a row that we haven't defaulted on our bills. But I get the point. 11 Senate Republicans. We needed 10. We got 11. But there was drama as they couldn't tell for sure while the vote was going on that they were going to actually get their 10. Most Republicans still wanted to vote no on cloture and thereby extend the crisis. So that was the funny part, right? The whole year we've been saying, well, if Manchin wants to preserve the filibuster, then it's his responsibility to go get 10 Republican votes. And we all doubted that he could find 10 Republican votes. And for a while, it looked like even Republicans couldn't find 10 Republican votes. So, for a deal that they supposedly were blessing. So where were we? 11 Senate Republicans joined all Senate Democrats to break a filibuster. And by the way, we might as well note for the record, that was Democratic unity, Manchin and Sinema voting with the Democrats, as expected. Nobody really expected them to depart from the ranks, but they've been so weird lately. Anyway, 11 Senate Republicans joined all Senate Democrats to break a filibuster and extend the debt limit through December 3rd. That's pretty early in December. Bringing a temporary end to weeks of contentious moments. The final vote on the debt ceiling itself, the extension, passed 50 to 48. So Republicans continued the plan. They would provide 10 here, 11 votes on cloture. That would give us permission to go ahead and have the vote on the debt limit extension. And they say extension rather than increase. So, then they say increase in the next paragraph. So, again, phrasing, everybody. So, the final vote, though, was 50 to 48, which means that all Republicans still voted no. We're not going to actually, take responsibility for the debt ceiling. We're going to make Democrats do it, but we'll give them permission to put themselves on record. And now they'll all go and, cut commercials accusing Democrats of being crazy tax and spenders and whatnot. In fact, John Cornyn spent yesterday doing the same thing, denying that the debt increase was necessary because of past spending, and just straight up, turning truth on its head and saying, well, the reason that they need to increase the debt ceiling is so that they can approve future spending. Which, if you squint and look at it kind of just right, you could come to that conclusion, and obviously that's what he wants to do. You can't do any more spending unless there's an increase in the debt ceiling. That's true. But the reason that the debt ceiling had to be lifted was because it's been reached. And you can't reach the debt ceiling with bills that haven't been passed yet. The reason you're at the debt ceiling is past spending. It can't be any other way. So I dispute the way John Cornyn looks at it, and a lot of people were disputing it and wondering, are you really smart enough to be a senator if you can't grasp this concept. But you know how people are. Okay, let's see. The deal offered on Wednesday by Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says, seen above, yes, he's the guy in the picture captioned width equals 580. I don't think Mitch actually looks that heavy, quite honestly, but they think he's wider than he is tall. I don't think so, though it could be the picture they're talking about. The deal increases, it actually does increase the debt limit by $480 billion. It came after months of warnings by the GOP leader that Republicans would not vote for an extension and for Democrats to pass it on their own via reconciliation. This is a temporary but necessary and important fix. I appreciate at the end of the day that we were able to raise the debt limit without a convoluted and unnecessary reconciliation process that until today the Republican leader claimed was the only way to address the debt limit, said Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. It says he's pictured below, but I haven't seen it yet. I believe him. That's what he said on the Senate floor following the cloture vote. And apparently he made a speech, I guess, I don't know whether it was following the cloture vote or following the vote on the deal itself, but apparently a speech panned by Republicans as unnecessarily sharp-elbowed and partisan, although, you know, it's only because they forced the country into the danger of default and global economic meltdown for purely political reasons that he would say such a thing. But, of course, he's the partisan for noting what had actually happened. Anyway, he also caught some flack from some Democrats, including Joe Manchin, who really thought, I guess, that he should have been gracious and, geez, thanks a lot for helping us out, whatever. And most of the press ran with that, of course. Instead, let's see, the Democratic floor leaders, there was a little bit more of the speech here. Today's vote is proof positive that the debt limit can be addressed without going through the reconciliation process. Obviously, they usually do it that way. Just as Democrats have been saying for months, Schumer added. The Democratic leader's floor remarks rankled multiple senators, including John Thune and Joe Manchin, who was visibly dismayed midway through the speech. Oh, that is terrible. The West Virginia Democrat told reporters afterwards that he didn't think Schumer's comments were appropriate at this time. Well, whoop-de-doo. I'm sure Chuck's frustration was up, but that's not a way of taking it out, Manchin said. Sure it is. He just did it. We all watched. Well, I didn't watch. I'm reading about other people watching. Then they round up the headlines from around the trade press, etc. The group of 11 Senate Republicans was largely cobbled together by members of GOP leadership, allies of leadership, retiring members, and moderates. The yes votes on cloture were John Barrasso, Roy Blunt, Shelley Moore Capito, or did she say Capito? I never do remember with her. Susan Collins, boo. John Cornyn, who, you know, spent the day saying the opposite. Lisa Murkowski, Rob Portman, Mike Rounds, South Dakota, in case you forgot. Richard Shelby, Thune, and McConnell. So very interesting. Oh, this is interesting, too. They kind of, you know how they do the thing with the parentheses where they identify where they're from. And they have everybody's state here until they get to Thune, who they earlier identified when they quoted him the first time. So he's identified as being from South Dakota as well. And then McConnell. And then McConnell, everybody knows where he's from. And I think they also, because they made mention of him earlier, put the R Kentucky in there. But then it's weird. After the name McConnell, it just says in parentheses, The Hill. Now, remember, we're reading The Hill. That's the publication we're reading. So, you know, I don't know exactly how it got in there, but it makes it look like, you know, he doesn't represent Kentucky. He represents The Hill, which is kind of true. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said in a statement that Thursday's passage represented welcome steps, adding that President Biden plans to sign it. House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer announced late Thursday that the lower chamber will return from its 2-week recess to vote on the debt ceiling increase on Tuesday night. That, too, attributed to the Hill. I guess here what we're talking about is it's a link to another Hill story discussing I guess more expansively discussing the facts surrounding whatever they just asserted in the morning report. I get what they're doing now. However, the vote did not come without consternation on the GOP side. As the Hill's Alexander Bolton reports, the procedural vote sparked a major fight in the Senate GOP conference late Thursday afternoon that left Senate Republican leaders uncertain that they would have the needed 10 votes to clear the requisite 60-vote threshold on the Senate floor. McConnell and Thune acknowledged to GOP colleagues during a 90-minute closed-door meeting hours before the cloture vote that they did not yet have the 10 yes votes needed and asked colleagues for help. One Republican called the meeting very contentious and described widespread frustration in the room. Thursday's vote puts the debt ceiling issue back on the back burner for now, but that fight will come right back around the corner in either December or January and will likely be separate from the one to extend government funding before Christmas. Remember that we have government shutdown to deal with because we only have a short-term CR in place as well. So let's see. Before continuing on, and maybe this morning report is a good roundup for all these things and points us to other articles that we could consider for more context. But those yes votes, as they mentioned, it was contentious, and they had to sort of cast around. And McConnell kind of had to make a personal ask of his closest friends and allies and people in leadership positions that he could lean on and say, look, I know you don't want to make this vote. I know you think it'll hurt you, or you just don't like it, or your rhetoric has been the opposite of the vote up to this point, and it's weird and embarrassing to change direction, but that's leadership. You know, leadership needs to occasionally do the tough thing. That's the price of having that leadership role. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I would guess among this group that we named before, Collins, maybe Capito, Murkowski, possibly Portman, and that's probably it, really. Maybe, I don't know, maybe one or two others. Maybe Roy Blunt possibly was actually interested in getting the deal done for the sake of not causing a global economic meltdown, but maybe not. It's hard to read Roy Blunt. Sometimes he's into that stuff and sometimes he's not. But the rest of them, I think, are people that McConnell leaned on and said, look, I just need you to do this for me personally or as part of your role in leadership. Barrasso from Wyoming, in case, again, that's one we forgot to identify. Cornyn, Mike Rounds, although I don't know much about that guy. Thune, and of course McConnell being the. I think he wanted to, avoid the meltdown, not because the meltdown worried him so much as he thought, well, this really could come back and hurt Republicans as well. People are actually maybe kind of sort of paying attention to this thing, and maybe global economic meltdown would give everybody lots of time to consider what really happened here. Anyway, part of McConnell's calculus in offering the 2-month debt limit extension was to give some relief to Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, who have been under heavy pressure in recent days to support a carve-out in the filibuster to extend the debt ceiling. And that'll be a major topic of discussion with Ellie in the next segment, for sure, and whether or not we'll find ourselves back in that position in December. Manchin made all sorts of statements insisting that he wasn't going to change his mind, but, the facts on the ground changed, and they'll change again between now and the next time we have to do this. So, again, part of the calculus, giving some relief to the Democratic holdouts who have thus far prevented the Democratic caucus from imposing filibuster reform or carve-outs on the Republicans against their will. The move had been gaining momentum within the Senate Democratic ranks, that is the move for a carve-out, as they struggled to come up with a way to raise the nation's borrowing limit without GOP support. As the Hill's Jordan Carney writes, and it's spelled Jordan, but I wonder if it just says, if they just say Jordan. McConnell, according to other GOP senators, noted that the off-ramp he was offering could be beneficial to the pair of centrist Democrats. He said, I think I've come up with a solution that could work, and I think Joe and Kyrsten will allow, said Senator Kevin Cramer, who you might have forgotten is a senator. He's from North Dakota. Let's see, the Associated Press reporting in this, Congressional Progressive Caucus Chair Representative Pramila Jayapal, interviewed on Thursday, said she pushed Biden to keep the spending bill closer, sort of changing topics here, spending bill closer to $3 trillion than $2 trillion as her party discussed downsizing the size and scope of the measure. In a similar interview with CBS, she said progressives do not have a red line in mind for the bill. So just turning back to the substance of things later on. And there's the picture of Chuck Schumer. He's masked in his picture, and just as it did above, we have Chuck Schumer, width 580, height 387, data delta this time equals 3. That was important to somebody at the Hill, but they didn't necessarily mean to share it with us. All right. That's pretty odd. And, a little bit of an awkward way of ending the article. But let's check in pocket as we head towards our first break. Ellie is going to join us, hopefully during the break, so we can have a nice smooth transition into the 9:30 to 10 o'clock block to talk about developments in filibuster reform and how close we came and whether we'll get there again, and all sorts of fun things surrounding that. Let's see. So we did the Hill's morning report. I guess that's pretty much what I had lined up for this. We'll discuss later on in the show, of course, some of the other big developments. Now there's been time for reporters to digest some, if not all, of the contents of the Senate Judiciary Committee's report on the election subversion activity in the Trump White House and the nearby environs in the DOJ. So we can perhaps head back to that in our second hour. But like I said, all right, just setting things up for the break, and we'll check in with Ellie and see what this whole episode has meant for filibuster reform. And I'd be interested to see what his take on all of this is, and whether he thought this thing was going to work yesterday or what, and how closely did he watch. And if he watched really closely, we can maybe check our work on guessing how that vote actually set up, though I can't imagine it set up any other way. All right, we'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We've made our first attempt at connecting with Ellie here, but I couldn't hear him, so I'm going to try and give him a call back here. And we'll just do the ringy-dingies on the air this time and see if this works, because, hey, it's all right. Let's see. Let's do this. Yes. All right. Interesting. Skype asking me if I wanted to use Skype to make the call. Well, sure I do. It's pleasant enough music. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's see. Maybe I'll have him give a try instead. Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe his headphones are plugged in. They are differently able. Ah, here we go. Here's him calling me. Let's try this. Good morning, Ellie. How you doing? Oh, no. We still don't hear you. Oh, now I hear myself. How about that? Oh, some plugs.
Hey, sorry about that.
Hey, no problem. Okay. A little bit of a slip this morning. Okay, so it's been a while maybe since you've used Skype for something.
That's right. It had to re-download. It was.
Yeah.
I thought it was there, then it wasn't.
Yeah.
Technology.
You know, everybody has moved to the Zoom platform, and I think Skype has been the big loser in the online teleconferencing world during the pandemic. I don't know how Zoom did it, but maybe we ought to switch to Zoom. Everybody's geared up for that now. Well, anyway.
Yeah, we're here now.
Yes. So, it's been a little while since we spoke, but as I was saying, the filibuster had bit of a moment this week and yesterday. And centered around, of course, the debt ceiling issue. And it looked for one hot minute there like we might actually find a way to move the most reluctant senators, possibly including Joe Manchin, although nobody ever knows what's going on with Kyrsten Sinema, to admit that at least a carve-out in the filibuster rule might be necessary to continue governing as a United States of America. So that was kind of an exciting moment. How did you view this past week and this issue, and what were your feelings yesterday as they actually kind of worked out a deal?
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me on. I know you have been tracking this issue for a really long time, and now it is truly heating up and has shifted significantly over the past year. I mean, this was a big week for filibuster reform. I think this week brought us closer to reform, even if we ultimately had a pause. And I think it's gonna unpause in a few months, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the reality is that this week we saw more than ever, it could not be clearer that the filibuster was being used and abused in a way that very clearly did not promote bipartisanship and compromise. Whatever one thinks about the filibuster, whatever one thought about the filibuster before, there's no way you can come out of this week thinking Mitch McConnell was using the filibuster to promote bipartisanship and compromise. Of course not. He was using it as a weapon for political reasons. He wanted to score political points by sowing chaos and dysfunction, by pushing the country closer to an economic calamity and trying to control the Senate from the minority. So what we saw this week was Democrats called his bluff to some extent. They didn't call it all the way. I had hoped that they would bring it all the way to the end and really call his bluff and pass this debt limit extension over the long term, or maybe even eliminate it or extend it so far into the future that it becomes meaningless with a simple majority and addressing the filibuster to do so. But, they didn't do that now, but they called his bluff. They didn't go to reconciliation. They said it was that there was no way they were going to do that, and they didn't do it. They said they had to do it through regular order and that Republicans had to give them 10 votes, or, they were going to seriously consider doing something about the filibuster. Republicans gave them 10 votes. They blinked. But, so I was disappointed to see it play out this way last night, not because anything bad happened, but because it just kicks it 2 months down the road. But if you look 2 months ahead, if you look to December, absolutely nothing has changed. The dynamics remain the same. Either Democrats cave and go to reconciliation, which from everything I'm hearing from senators and Senate staff, that's not going to happen. Democrats are pretty firmly dug in that's not right. It's not the right way to do it. They're not going to let McConnell win on that. Or the other two options are Republicans fully cave and give them 10 votes for a long-term extension, which seems unlikely. They could barely scrape together 10 votes for a short-term extension. Or finally, they have to finally do something about the filibuster. That's the only way this could end 2 months from now, just like, before there was a 2-month reprieve. That's the only way it could have ended this week. So that's kind of where things stand, but it was definitely a roller coaster of a week. But I believe the conversations that the caucus had and the clear demonstration that the filibuster was being abused moved us closer than we've ever been, even if we didn't get there.
So. It certainly felt that way, and there was a brief moment where it sounded like even Manchin was possibly open to it, though he was very invested in reminding everybody that he was a firm supporter. And it's funny, of course, you mentioned there's no possible way you could have looked at this and not come to the conclusion that McConnell was abusing the filibuster and not using it as a tool for promoting bipartisan compromise. So immediately out comes Manchin to say, well, I love the filibuster because it's a tool that ensures bipartisan compromise. He's the last person on earth to believe this, I think. But yeah,
that's right. But I think it's important too to separate Senator Manchin's public comments from what he truly believes, and we've seen this time and again. He is someone, it's his style. His negotiating style is he draws very hard lines in the sand to strengthen his position. We saw this on the COVID relief package. As late as February and March, he was saying that there was no way he would sign on unless it was bipartisan. He wanted to do that in order to push Democrats to work with Republicans. and he saw that Democrats worked with Republicans, tried to bring them on board. He tried in good faith, but when they didn't come on board, in the end, he was willing to do what he said he wouldn't do, which is sign on to a bill that had bipartisan support across the country, but just couldn't get Republicans on board because they were playing politics. I think we have more evidence when The Intercept reported a few months ago that in a closed-door meeting with no labels of all people who support the filibuster, he expressed more openness to reform than he had ever expressed publicly. He said he was open to, he thought, he even explained that he wants to publicly make it clear that he's not getting rid of the filibuster, but privately he thinks that there could be some reforms. And he specifically talked about a pretty strong version of a talking filibuster that would put the onus on the minority to produce 41 votes instead of the majority to produce 60. So, of course it's frustrating hearing Senator Manchin say things like that. It's so far from the reality of what we see in the Senate. But I still believe that every time one of these things happen, the January 6th commission was a big one where he saw and he said he expressed frustration. He implored Republicans to work with him. They filibustered that. Same thing on the For the People Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. He genuinely wants Republicans to work with him, and he is frustrated that they're not. Every time something like this happens, it chips away, and yet, like I said, it's frustrating to hear him say that. But I think you shouldn't give up hope. It's not the end of the fight. It's just his posture right now.
I think that's a good observation and a very good point about him. He's a little bit of an enigma, not as much as Sinema, who just doesn't say much, but yes, it seems clear that he's moving ever so slightly, and that each one of these episodes moves him just a little bit more towards admitting that, okay, at least some reform may be necessary. Now,
I think so.
In the last week or so, I guess in the scramble towards yesterday's vote, when Democrats were considering things privately in their conference discussions, there were a couple of weird iterations of the carve-out that got floated out there, and I'm not certain where they came from. But did you catch the various weird ideas that were out there? And what do you think of those?
I did. The ones, to lay them out, the ones that were reported were a narrow carve out for debt limit extensions or hikes. Mm-hmm. Very similar to what people have been talking about with democracy reform. People have called it the John Lewis carve out. Yes. The idea that there are certain bills that are so important or of such a nature that they shouldn't be subject to a 60 vote threshold. Of course, I think that no bill should be subject to a 60-vote threshold. That was never the intent of our founders or the intent of the senators over many, many years. But, that not everyone agrees with me. There's a lot of carve-outs already on nominations and budget bills and trade bills that get fast-tracked. So this is the idea that some things should also be carved out. Most people talked about it for democracy reform, but the senators clearly brought that into their caucus with them and discussed the possibility of carving out the debt limit from the filibuster. The other one, which seemed like it never really had traction and seemed a little far-fetched, was a one-day elimination of the filibuster, which seemed, I don't know who floated that. I had never heard anything like that before. No. I was pretty confident it wouldn't happen.
Yeah, that seemed very weird and difficult to explain at home and a little science fiction-y almost.
Right.
One show that's like, once a year there's no law or something.
Right. Well, if the House can extend legislative day for multiple days, I guess the Senate can pause the filibuster for a day.
It can happen. And there is actually some history in the study that I've made of the filibuster reform for voting for a change in the filibuster rules and then voting to undo them. Although it was actually a one-off. They decided to when they reformed in 1975 and changed from 67 votes or a 2/3 threshold down to 3/5. There was a proposal that the procedure they had used, the original, nuclear option / constitutional option to allow for majority vote to make that change. Somebody actually made the request that they go back, and now that they've made the change and adopted the new rule, go back and reject the precedent by which they allowed things to have been done by a majority vote, to erase it so that no one could go back and use it later for further change, like a sort of the Bush v. Gore thing, like we're making this decision, but it's not used as precedent for anything. That did not work. They didn't go ahead and do it, but there is a school of thought out there that you can kind of change the rule and then just change it right back. Versus,
yeah, I mean, the funny thing about the Senate, the thing that really gets overlooked in a lot of these conversations is that a simple majority, 50+1, can do almost anything they want. So even if you undo precedent, you can always redo it. If you have the majority, you can change the rules, and that's been shown time and again in 2013, 2017, and McConnell did it on a couple other issues like reducing the number of hours for cloture beyond that as well.
Yeah. So let's say as we mentioned, this kicks things down the road just a little bit. We'll probably find ourselves back in this position, not only on the debt ceiling, but I guess also on government shutdown in December. So there are probably two other opportunities to run into the same brick wall and see how Manchin and Sinema react to that. Although it does also seem clear that from this episode that maybe McConnell just has this on his radar and he'll be trying his best for the next 2 months to think of a way to avoid it and not get in that position again.
I mean, he is clearly petrified of a Senate without the filibuster. He knows that the filibuster is the best tool he has to block progress on the issues that he and his donors and his allies don't want to see any progress made on. Everything from raising the minimum wage to the PRO Act, and the list goes on, comprehensive immigration reform and so on. So there's, he is scared. He knows that Democrats are inching closer. He knows that members that would never have conceived of doing this before, maybe that some of the moderates like, Senator Leahy or Senator Carper or Coons or Senator Tester are now ready. Maybe they're not enthusiastic endorsers of filibuster reform, but they will do it if it's necessary. And, you mentioned a potential government shutdown. You mentioned another debt limit fight. We're also having another run at democracy reform, at voting rights and democracy reform and ethics in just a couple of weeks. Senator Schumer said that when they get back from recess, they're going to take up the Freedom to Vote Act. As I'm sure your listeners remember, this is what Senator Manchin personally worked on, moving away from the For the People Act to a slimmed down version that has the support of Senator Manchin himself personally, and every other Democrat would pass the Senate with a majority. That's going to come up, is certain to get filibustered. It is almost certain to not get a single Republican vote. If it, there's some chance it gets one, but almost certainly not. And that's going to be another test. That's going to be one where Leader Schumer said failure is not an option. Senator Manchin said inaction is not an option. We heard President Biden talk about how it's Jim Crow on steroids out in states across the country. And that we also, Rolling Stone reported a couple of weeks ago that he is planning to get more engaged. When the reporting back then was once he got past reconciliation. That's been extended now, but the hope is that he is engaged when the moment is right. And that's going to be a big test, because that's going to be the one where Senate Democrats understand this may not be the issue on top of voters' minds, but it is one that is a potential political and, frankly, just moral cataclysm for them. If they go into 22 not protecting voters, allowing the House to be rigged for 10 years, not taking the opportunity to protect the vote in 24 when we could have another Trump run and potential stolen election, people will look back at this as one of the greatest political mistakes in history, a massive missed opportunity. If they do literally nothing in the face of everything going on, all these attacks on democracy, that would be, it's almost unthinkable. And Democrats, for the most part, understand that. So that's going to be a big test coming up in a few weeks. So there's going to be a number of big bites at the apple coming up through the rest of this year. And, I just hope that Senate Democrats and President Biden take this opportunity, because it's only going to get harder once we get past this year. Pretty soon it's going to become, very difficult, if not impossible, as we get closer to the campaign season.
Yeah, that traditionally closes out the substantive legislative work of any Congress going into a contentious election like that. We also, so you're right, we'll be back on this and have other opportunities in the next few months. It also occurs to me that when they actually do bring the reconciliation bill to the floor, we get sort of the junior partner, the distant cousin of the filibuster fight in dealing with the Byrd rule and filibuster reconciliation. And now that the Democrats have run into such trouble getting their preferred immigration language included in the reconciliation bill, there's now more open talk of, well, what if we just have Vice President Harris attending the session and presiding over the session and giving a ruling contrary to the advice of the parliamentarian in order to allow for the inclusion of immigration language in the reconciliation bill. And it's not exactly the same issue, of course, but it draws a lot of the same lines, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes down with Manchin and Sinema.
That's right. I mean, well, a few things on that. First, whenever reconciliation comes up, this is a good thing for filibuster reform. We saw this on the COVID relief plan right at the start of the Congress. It became what reconciliation does, especially reconciliation as it's used now today by both parties, where they try and jam every priority they can into one bill. For Republicans, of course, it was tax cuts for the rich. For Democrats, it's a big set of policies that they promised voters and that would move the country in the right direction. Every time that happens, it shines a spotlight on how absurd it is that some big issues can get dealt with just 50 votes. If you have a majority to make massive tax cuts, or you have a majority to put in place a big new program that will change people's lives, hopefully for the better, for a long time, you could do that with just 50 votes. But if it's something policy related, if you can't attach a number of dollar figure to it, or if the parliamentarian thinks it's not budgetary in nature, or that the policy implications are more than merely incidental, you can't. And that shines a spotlight on the absurdity of the filibuster. How could it be so important to need 60 votes for something like raising the minimum wage? And that then it would break the Senate if you got rid of the filibuster to raise the minimum wage. But then it's perfectly fine to cut taxes or send people checks with just 50 votes. Like that makes nobody would construct a system where that was that way. It just doesn't make any sense. So that's first of all. So anytime reconciliation comes up, the arguments that Sinema and Manchin and others have against the filibuster kind of fall away, because they are dealing with a simple majority vote on big issues. And they're not out there saying we should have 60 votes for reconciliation. They might, but they don't actually believe that. They vote for reconciliation. And then the other thing I'll say is, I completely understand why many advocates are very interested in having Senate Democrats ignore the ruling of the parliamentarian. I get it. I mean, especially when it comes to something like immigration, where real lives are at stake, and people, dreamers, young people, and many others who are in this country and don't know any other home, want to be able to have that uncertainty lifted and be able to be safe and protected. And of course, they should pursue every option to do that. But I think that my personal view is that the likelier outcome is that we get filibuster reform. I think that having Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, the likelihood that they would overturn a parliamentarian's ruling on reconciliation, it's possible, but I think it is more possible that they would eventually be open to filibuster reform. But that's another thing that highlights just how absurd it is. I mean, the parliamentarian saying allowing massive tax cuts, allowing a whole host of issues, but saying that, dreamers are being allowed to stay in the country with clear budgetary impacts, or, something, DC statehood, which should have clear budgetary impacts, would almost certainly, I would imagine, be stripped if that was ever done through reconciliation. It's an absurd process. It doesn't make any sense. And the filibuster is the heart of what is wrong with it, because they wouldn't have to try to jam this into reconciliation if they could just move it through a normal process where all you need is 50 votes.
Yes, I think it's well put there. You kind of say, I understand the frustration and why you would want to do things this way, but yeah, you should at least, when you're doing it, if you do resort to that, recognize why it is that you're jumping through this particular hoop. And if we just had a normal process everywhere else, you wouldn't have to do anything like this. If it makes you uncomfortable to rule contrary to the parliamentarian, and as much as I'm sympathetic to the issue, the parliamentarians' ruling, according to the rules that we've got, is pretty much correct. It has budgetary impact, but it's clearly not the main aim of the legislation. I'm willing to put that aside if that's the only way we can get it done, but it's also a good opportunity, as you say, to explain, look, you wouldn't have to have this other weird esoteric question about the Byrd rule if you had just said we could leave reconciliation for budget issues alone and everybody gets to vote and majority rules on a straight up and down vote on immigration elsewhere.
That's right. And, it's important to remember that doesn't mean that progressives are going to get everything we want. If you need 50 votes in the Senate, that means you need Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema.
Yeah.
Minimum wage is a great example of that, where it is.
Good point.
Unfortunately, probably not. We're probably not going to get a $15 minimum wage this Congress, but it would change millions of lives if Democrats could raise the minimum wage to something, whatever they can do, the best they can do. Who knows? Maybe it's 12, maybe it's 13. Up from $7.25 an hour right now would be a game changer, a life changer for millions and millions of low-income workers. That is impossible right now. That will not happen until the filibuster is addressed. And again, to go back to something I keep saying, can you imagine sitting there at the end of 22 or going into an election season in 22 and Democrats going across the country after promising to raise the minimum wage, having full control of government handed to them by voters, and the minimum wage sitting there still at $7.25 an hour because they prioritized a Senate procedure? That is hard to believe, hard to imagine. But that's what would happen if they don't do it.
True, and I'd hate to have to run one of those campaigns, quite honestly. But not my job, thankfully. Let's see, what else, what's coming up? I guess I've been thinking a lot about the big momentum that there has been because of these very important, crucial bills, not only the debt ceiling, but all the other actual substantive issues that we've discussed along the way. And all of these tests coming up, but there's been a great momentum toward filibuster reform and, of course, the realization everywhere that these things can be handled by simple majorities on the Senate floor. Really, it's been great for me. It feels like it's caught on, right? There's a New York Times editorial board discussing the necessity for reform and the ease with which it can be done. We saw tweeted around just the other day photos of the protest on the Golden Gate Bridge, back on the reconciliation issue, but reporters like Dave Weigel noting that I don't think I've ever seen a protest banner that says "Overrule the parliamentarian" on it.
Yeah,
but
Senate process is hot right now. Unfortunately, that is. I would, even though it is my area and your area, I think I'm safe saying both of us would rather nobody was talking about Senate process and people were talking about other things.
Yeah, like the solutions along the way. But
That's right.
It's a unique time, and certainly we've come a long way in raising awareness of it, and now that job falls to you. But it must be a good time in terms of realizing that there really is popular awareness of it.
Yeah, it's frustrating, and we've got an amazing coalition. We're now close to 90 organizations representing tens of millions of people. We're about to put out another buy, paid buy in states across the country to keep the pressure on. And like you've noted before, we are in a much different place than we've ever been. This was an issue that progressives were right about for a long time. You, many others, have been talking about this for a long time. But what has changed this year, thanks to that hard work over many, many years, is that moderates and people in the middle and even some center-right Republicans are now agreeing, and it has become more and more obvious to everyone, from people like David Brooks and Jennifer Rubin in the pundit class, and many others who are now looking at the Senate and saying, just doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. The filibuster, they may not have had to pay attention to it when all it was doing was blocking civil rights bills. Yes. Not them in particular, maybe, but many others didn't have to think about it. But as soon as it started infecting everything, then it became something that was clear to all. And of course, that's not a good thing that it took that. People should have paid attention to it long ago when it was blocking civil rights bills and voting rights bills and anti-lynching bills. But, we are where we are now, and people understand that the filibuster, we cannot have a country, we cannot have a government where the majority party cannot actually implement their agenda. It doesn't make sense. And it's not just Democrats. If Republicans took charge, they would get rid of the filibuster because they will have promised voters something. And if they get full control of government in 2025, you can be very sure that the filibuster will not last a moment, that maybe Senator McConnell was able to resist his base on the legislative filibuster in 2017. Of course, he got rid of the Supreme Court filibuster the moment he needed to. Maybe he was able to resist. I think he didn't want to get rid of the filibuster, but he will not be able to withstand pressure from his base in 25, especially if there's anything about the election that was contested. I mean, can you imagine if there's a somewhat contested election, the pressure on McConnell to do things like ban mail-in voting or, whatever else he's going to do. The filibuster is not long for this world. We see Democratic candidates in every Senate race supporting filibuster reform. The filibuster will not be here in 5 years, one way or another. And going back to what we said before, if they miss this opportunity to make those structural changes, to deliver on those promises, that would just be a huge mistake. It would be a massive missed opportunity.
Yeah, no other way to describe it. All I can say is I'm glad we laid the foundation for convincing people that it was finally necessary, and you've done a fantastic job continuing that work and building this coalition. Everybody can examine the parameters of that coalition at fixoursenate.org. Ellie Zupnik, thanks very much for coming by once again and checking in. We'll have to talk again, I assume, because we haven't finished our work. Thanks for coming by.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, terrific. Well, we'll be right back after a 1-minute break, and we'll be right back here again in December, so everything will be fine. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're back on our regular schedule. Thanks again to Ellie Zupnik of fixoursenate.org for joining us and bringing us up to date, making some excellent points. Oh, if I'd had another hour, I think, at some point, well, maybe next time, we can discuss the very interesting point that Greg made, connecting the debt ceiling or the debt limit and the filibuster as both having come out of that World War I era fight in the Senate over, what shall we call it? Sort of a silent partnership in World War I, but the necessity of raising revenue to prepare to fight in the war and eventually to actually fight in the war, and just basically the difficulties that President Wilson had in pushing his foreign policy through the Senate, finding resistance from progressives of the era, the original Midwestern Republican progressives, mostly resistant to his agenda, and taking full advantage of the filibuster when there was no cloture rule at all. And there was simply no way to cut off debate in the Senate. And that's when they came up with the cloture rule in order to, essentially facing the same situation. Huge national security implications to what was going on. Global peace at stake, although the United States wasn't at that time the same kind of player in world affairs that we are now. But essentially life or death decisions that needed to be made, or at least national security decisions that needed to be made in the interest of the country, and a resolution simply being prevented by abuse of the filibuster, and getting to the point there where the rest of the Senate just became fed up and said, well, certainly if we're this united against the continuing filibuster from the Republican Midwestern progressives, we can get something together on along the lines of 2/3, right? 2/3, I imagine they settled on as the sort of default parliamentary rule for suspending normal rules. If you couldn't get unanimous consent to end debate because someone was filibustering, certainly you could move a 2/3 vote to suspend the rules and shut that guy up. And then they decided to just codify that into a process that was separate from suspending the rules, and that could be set down as written procedure from there on in. And then again, as Greg was reminding us at the same time, they also ran into the problem of, well, we need to be able to sell bonds in order to raise money and take on debt by selling bonds in order to raise money to take an active role in and to prosecute the war once we were in. And, big resistance to that from, I guess, the original fiscal hawks. And as Greg explained, the only way you could get them to acknowledge that the bigger question was that of national security and the ability to prosecute the war versus their, I don't know what you would say, fiscal paranoia about what would happen if we just borrowed too much. Although I guess then we were on the gold standard, maybe there was more reason to worry about things like that than there is these days. But that was a concession to the budget hawks of the day. We will borrow, yes, you'll allow us to borrow in exchange for our voluntarily and somewhat arbitrarily imposing a debt limit on ourselves. We'll borrow, but no more than this. And I imagine it was pretty immediately abandoned. Certainly we've made a mockery of it now, suspending it, kicking it down the road, or just thinking about eliminating it again entirely, or making the number so large that we'll not hit it for years and years. Although that was actually the way they usually used to extend or raise the debt ceiling before. They just never imagined they'd get to that number. Now we know we'll never not get to that number. But for most of our history, we existed without a debt limit, and we could certainly go back to that. It's just one of those things that have been around long enough that people think it was with us since the founding, but it really hasn't been. But interesting that the two major problems of this week both have roots in the World War I era and the same general fight as between the president and the Senate of the day. I found that kind of interesting, but we didn't have time for that one. Anyway, I've since been taking a glance at yesterday's roll call votes in the Senate, trying to find out which one it was that, or by what mechanism they were suspending or adopting the new debt ceiling fix, which I guess, again, did in fact have a number attached to it. Although now I already forget what it was from our reading in the Hill. $480 billion increase in the debt limit. Okay. So, there's the vote there. Let's see how they put this up. On the cloture motion, the motion to invoke cloture, the formality of this right here. On the cloture motion, motion to invoke cloture, I always learned that you shouldn't be putting extra colons after that. Maybe a semicolon. Motion to invoke cloture. Motion to concur in the House amendment to S 1301 with an amendment numbered 3847, a bill to provide for the publication by the Secretary of Health and Human Services of physical activity recommendations for Americans. That is not what it sounds like, but I think they must have used that as the vehicle to offer this deal. They must have just gutted whatever was in S 1301, I guess, as they say here, a bill to provide for the publication by the Secretary of Health and Human Services of physical activity recommendations for Americans. All right, scrap that. Kill every bit of text in it and instead insert the language of our deal, raising the debt ceiling by $480 billion. They needed to do it quickly, So they needed a bill that had already been reported out and was ready for floor action, I guess. That was the only thing voted on yesterday that registered a vote tally of 61 to 38. It wasn't the only cloture motion dealt with yesterday, by the way. There was another one on the nomination of Gustavo Gilpy to be U.S. Circuit Judge for the First Circuit. That was the last vote taken yesterday. That, too, a cloture motion. But so they had the cloture motion and immediately followed by, just another clue, just so we're sure here, was followed by another vote tally of 50 to 48, just as described in the Hill article that we read before, on the motion to concur in that House amendment now that cloture had been invoked. We could read the floor exchange from yesterday to find out by what mechanism, I assume unanimous consent, the 30 hours of post-cloture debate were waived. And I assume that was part of a deal ahead of time. So they didn't do the painless filibuster per se. That is, it wasn't that they bypassed the cloture vote at all and simply, by unanimous consent, agreed to impose the 60-vote threshold on the substantive question, that is, the language raising the debt ceiling. They did insist on cloture and then go forward with the vote on the underlying legislation instead. But they must also have waived the 30 hours. And I assume also the ripening of the cloture motion as well. That they must have gotten, or probably got, unanimous consent on, because McConnell only announced the deal on Wednesday, and if they voted on Thursday, ordinarily if they had gone through the whole rigmarole attached to the cloture motion, he would have announced the deal Wednesday. Schumer presumably would have filed a cloture petition on it on Wednesday once there was word that there was a deal. That would have required all of yesterday, Thursday, to pass. And then today, as soon as an hour after midnight, if they had stayed in session all night, today they would have been eligible to finally hold the cloture vote, after which 30 hours would have to pass. So they'd have to stay here over the weekend and vote on Saturday and or Sunday in order to actually get to the substance of adopting this debt ceiling increase. So that's just one of the problems that the filibuster brings with it, is all this time wasting. And of course, we mentioned in discussion with Ellie that in case you didn't quite get what they were talking about, it's been a little unclear in the fight over whether or not to use reconciliation to raise the debt ceiling. The language that came out of the Democratic caucus during this past week was that no, that we can't use reconciliation to raise the debt ceiling. That may have been a little bit confusing to you because, of course, I've been telling you all along that you can. And you can. The actual rule is, yes, absolutely, you can use reconciliation to raise the debt limit. There are believed to be some strange limitations on that. We can discuss that in a second, too. But yes, you can. What the Democrats were saying when they were saying this week, well, we can't use reconciliation to do this, what they meant was it will take too long and will possibly risk missing the deadline for raising the debt ceiling if we actually use reconciliation instead. That is, of course, we would need to. First of all, there were no reconciliation instructions in the budget resolution with respect to raising the debt limit, which I think was a mistake and I think ought to be standard practice pretty much. If you think there's any risk whatsoever that you're going to reach the debt limit in the upcoming year, you should absolutely include those instructions just as a backup plan so you don't get into this situation. But I think they intentionally didn't include them because they kind of wanted to possibly have this fight which is a bit risky. And, in the back of your mind, if you're keeping score, yeah, there was a moment there where Democrats took a calculated risk of global financial meltdown in order to provoke a moment of chaos that would have to result in either Manchin and Sinema coming to understand that this was the only way forward and caving on their opposition, at least to a limited change in the filibuster rules, or forcing Republicans to say, all right, well, we'll find 10 votes in order to get cloture on a bill long term. So anyway, you can and should, in my view, use reconciliation if necessary. You should also always be prepared to use reconciliation if necessary. But in order to get there now that they didn't take that precaution, you would need to amend the budget resolution to add those instructions. Then you'd have to take those instructions, and get committees moving on the language. That shouldn't be too hard. And it probably wouldn't even be more than one committee that would be absolutely necessary. Maybe the Budget Committee could actually take care of it by itself. Although I don't know what jurisdiction rules are in the Senate. What committee would have direct jurisdiction over an increase in the debt ceiling? Would the Finance Committee be necessary for that one? Could Budget do it all by itself? Even if Budget could do it all by itself, and they had a number in mind and could race through it and get it back to the floor, then, of course, it's a reconciliation bill, and it is treated like reconciliation. And although it's not subject to the filibuster, the reason it's not subject to the filibuster is that it's time limited in its debate, but the time is pretty long. And the budget has the same issue. The budget, too, not subject to filibuster because it, too, is time limited. And therefore, statutorily, there's there's a maximum number of hours that they can debate it. There's not really necessarily a minimum number, but because that maximum is out there, unless they can get agreement to do something less, either by unanimous consent or some other mechanism, and Republicans would probably resist it, there's an easy way for Republicans to stretch these things out to the max. So, vote-a-rama. You might recall that there's vote-a-rama very often when they bring budget bills to the floor. Less frequently we see or discuss the vote-a-rama that can accompany a reconciliation bill. It does and it happens the same way. Essentially, you just offer any number of amendments, crazy or otherwise, and just offer so many that you run out of time, and then you just have a marathon session of voting on things that you are barely able to debate before the vote is called. And that would have happened. In order to go the reconciliation route to fix the debt ceiling, you would have had to go with a budget amendment, which would entail its own vote-a-rama. And then the budget amendment passing, you'd then have to write the reconciliation bill that fixes the debt ceiling itself, then bring that to the floor, and it too subject to its own vote-a-rama. So it was very possible that Republicans could have stretched things out to where we're sweating bullets on October 17th and even into the early hours of October 18th, hoping that we're going to finally get this vote-a-rama done and every Republican collapses from exhaustion, and then we can vote on the thing before the Treasury comes out and announces, that's it. It's done. You've waited too long. We're going to have to default. So that was just a very dangerous situation. That was the reason Democrats said we can't do it via reconciliation and won't do it via reconciliation, not because it's against the rules. It should be understood clearly. They could do it. It's just that there was more opportunity for Republicans to make a mess of it, so they wanted to avoid it. So in December or January, when this comes up again, Democrats are saying now that they also don't want to, won't want to, will refuse to, handle it via reconciliation because the same opportunity for mischief comes up. So, again, be aware of that as we move into that time period and people begin to report it as can't do under reconciliation. You can mutter under your breath, no, that's not actually true. and fix that for your friends and neighbors. All right, let's see. Oh, yes, I mentioned that there was something else that now, of course, it's completely slipped my mind what that other thing was. Oh, yes, right. The other possibility or the other problem with raising or dealing with the debt limit under reconciliation is that the theory goes that the parliamentarian would rule, and I don't know really on what basis, but apparently I guess there's some precedent for it. The preferred fix for everybody, for each of the parties, when they are the ones responsible for dispensing with the debt limit, either by raising the actual number on the debt limit or suspending it. The preferred solution seems to be opting to suspend it so that you don't have to go on record picking a number for a new and gigantic national debt limit and attaching your name to the OK for an additional $480 billion in spending, even though that's actually not very much considering that we're now sitting here looking at $3.5 trillion reconciliation bills. But you know how it is. So everybody prefers to simply suspend the debt limit rather than add new and real numbers to it. But the word is that the parliamentarian says that if you want the protection of reconciliation, there needs to be this, I guess the Byrd rule, the direct budgetary impact. And, I mean, there is a very direct budgetary impact from suspending the debt ceiling, I guess. But the one that they allow is now attaching an actual number to it, the one that makes everybody uncomfortable. So, if you're going to follow the rules and the precedents, and really, why would you? Then the only option available to you without overruling the parliamentarian or ruling contrary to the parliamentarian in a reconciliation context is to actually raise the number. So, courtesy of our good Twitter friend, and I have to scroll back and find the thing. Gosh, and it's going to take me a second here just to make sure that I have his last name correct, because I never trust my recollection, so I want to go back and make sure I have it correct. But an idea floated for how to properly raise the debt limit under reconciliation without actually having to attach an embarrassing number to it. Is it possible? And the answer is yeah. And now if I can just find the goddamn thing, I'll be able to do it. But I can describe it to you. But it was, as far as I know, the original idea of, come on, here we go. Ira Goldman, our good Twitter friend, so good that we couldn't remember his last name. Ira Goldman, KD by proxy, is his Twitter handle, and I now remember, I think, why that is. I'm not certain about the by proxy part. I think he's just having fun. But the KD thing, that's clearly not his initials. Ira Goldman, that's IG. Inspector General, you can remember it that way. KD is something completely different. And I think, if I recall correctly, here I'll go out on a limb and trust my recollection, unless it's in his profile. There we are. So now we can be certain it is in his profile. Remember that in addition to being an expert in parliamentary procedure and having worked in the, did he work for one member or did he work for the Legislative Counsel's office? He describes himself this way: I used to write laws, then I invented the knee defender, KD, right? That's where the KD comes from. The knee defender, in case you don't know. I mean, come on, guys. Do you not know what the knee defender is? Give me a break. Actually, a device that he invented, having had his knees smashed more than a few times by airline passengers seated in the row ahead of him, reclining their seats and doing so too quickly and encroaching on your space. And apparently that's a big pet peeve for frequent travelers. And he invented this device that you could set up on the back of the seat that would prevent the row in front of you from reclining into your space, or certainly into your knees. And actually a controversial product because, of course, the people who wanted to recline felt that they had the right. I bought this seat and I'm inclined to this space, and your seat can recline, and if you want to get out of the way of my seat, you can recline too and make a problem for the guy behind you. Eventually that ability to lean back, by the way, runs out when you get to the bulkheads, but never mind. That's neither here nor there. I can tell you that that has nothing to do with the filibuster or reconciliation. Suffering terribly today. I must have. There must be some allergen out there that's just making it more difficult than usual today. But anyway, he had an idea, and I might as well spoil it for you. You will be able to hear when this problem comes up again in January or December or whenever, and he makes a big splash with this announcement. You'll say you heard it here first, even though you'll be able to say, but it wasn't here. It came from Ira Goldman, KD by proxy. So here's the deal that he's thinking of, which is, what if instead of attaching an actual number to it, that was your suggestion, and instead of Democrats suggesting a number and then voting on it, what if there was a number that could be attached, but you didn't have to say it out loud, and you could pin the blame on someone else? You ready for this one? Here's the thing. Suppose you brought forward legislation that says, we propose to raise the debt limit, quote, by the amount of the increase in the federal debt incurred during the term in office of the 45th President of the United States. That's a number. I don't know what that number is. You could look it up. There is a finite number. How much did the federal debt increase during the term in office of the 45th President of the United States? That has a number attached to it. That number is the amount by which we now propose to raise the debt limit. But the language spells out very clearly that it is the fault of, I guess it doesn't really say it's the fault of, but you're supposed to assume it's the fault of the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, because, I don't know, for whatever reason we all think that the president is responsible solely, or at least in part, for the increase in the federal debt during their term in office, even if that's not necessarily the case. And even if Congress, which is directly responsible for that, is of a different party from the president. And the president intended to reject all of their spending measures, but was overridden. You know, people still want to hang it on the president. But that's an interesting thought, right? The parliamentarian will say, no, you have to say a number. Well, it doesn't say anywhere that I would have to say a number. It just has to have an identifiable value. And it does have one. It's the amount that the debt increased during the term in office of the 45th President of the United States. Go look it up and just, transpose it here and then put it onto the... That's the number. We don't know what it is, but it should be sufficient. It also certainly makes clear that raising the debt ceiling is about paying for prior spending, not about preparing the way for future spending. I thought that was pretty interesting, and it took me long enough to find the damn thing. So we'll call it well worth it. All right. Definitely a couple of other things to get to, today being Friday. Our last segment coming up. I know yesterday's promise was that we would possibly take a look at the AT&T One America News connection. But there are a couple other things here that might just need a little bit of discussion. Though I do feel like maybe now at this point we wait for yet more analysis of the 300 and whatever it was plus pages of the Senate report. And it was a topic of Greg's abbreviated pundit roundup for today too. His title being abbreviated pundit roundup, Subverting Justice. The Senate Judiciary Committee's report is out, so I know he's been studying it. So if we return to it on Monday, he might very well have an interest in discussing it then. All right, let's see. If not, of course, I've got a couple of articles that pick out a number of the highlights. But I think the weekend will be a good time for digestion of all of the reading. I'll be very curious to see, I'll be mildly curious to see, mostly because I think it isn't going to happen, and we can point at the failure to do it and, accuse people of various biases. But I was semi-curious to see whether the Sunday shows would take up the topic of the Senate Judiciary Committee's report. I am betting that they won't, probably because they are extraordinarily important to the future of the United States and the future of democracy in the United States, and holding that prior administration accountable, which is exactly the sort of thing that the Sunday shows wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. Instead, they'll probably talk about what's happening to President Biden's approval ratings and something, and isn't it really his fault that we are in a pandemic, and we've forgotten entirely about the negligence of the Trump administration killing the population today of Alaska. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So if you caught me on the way out there, if I need to clarify that about the state of Alaska having the life of every person in the state snuffed out, it is the tally I've been keeping alongside watching the rising numbers of total deaths due to COVID-19 in the United States. We are just over 730,000 currently, according to Worldometers, and with the trend being, nearly 2,000 dying each day, or being reported as having died on each day. At any rate, we are likely to surpass the equivalent of the entire population of the state of Alaska, which I believe, I can double check, but I believe I recall as being currently listed, according to the stats, also at Worldometer, at 731,545, if I recall correctly. It's now right in front of me, and yes, that's the case. So we're at just over 730,000 now. I had been doing it in terms of the largest cities in America. We're approaching that, the next city on that list too, which, let me just double check. U.S. cities by population. My recollection is that Seattle was next, just if you were wondering, having just passed Denver, Colorado, not all that long ago, at 715,000. Seattle, though, sits at 737,000, so it may take a couple of days to get there. After that, by the way, quantum leap in the size of cities. But if you're wondering who's next, we can play dramatic music for you and tell you who it is. It's San Francisco, California. Rather a large city, as I understand it. But like I said, quantum leap in the size between Seattle and San Francisco. Seattle at 737,015, according to where is this data coming from? This one is at Wikipedia here. And the population of San Francisco, though, listed currently at, and it's an estimate, I think, but a Census Bureau estimate. San Francisco, 873,965. So it'll be some time between killing off the population of Seattle and watching the population of San Francisco disappear. But it does seem clear that we'll probably get to 1 million deaths officially reported by COVID-19 before this is all over. I mean, the number of active cases still in the pipeline, multiplied by the 1.6% fatality rate from COVID-19, gets you pretty near to the million total all by itself. And that's if nobody else gets COVID from here on in. So I think eventually it's pretty much guaranteed. Even though I guess treatments along the way can improve and we might discover some way of turning things around even for the critically ill. Let's see. On the other hand, I guess while we're waiting to go from Seattle to San Francisco, the state of North Dakota stands at a population of just 762,062 people. That will be wiped off the map well before we get around to San Francisco. And then once we hit San Francisco, then I guess a quick succession after that. The state of South Dakota sits at 884,659. Then we're done with states for a little while. Delaware is the last state with a population lower than 1 million. But the milestones we'll hit along the way would be San Francisco, as I mentioned, 873,000, followed very closely at 874,579. Charlotte, North Carolina. 887,000 is where Indianapolis sits. And then once we're into the 900,000s, well, all bets are off then. It's in a pretty quick succession through Columbus, Fort Worth, Jacksonville, and Austin. After that, we're into cities with population of over 1 million. And there are only 10 of them in the entire country. Did you know that? Were you curious about them? In reverse order. San Jose, Dallas, San Diego, San Antonio, Philadelphia, Phoenix. Now into cities with populations of 2 million or more. There are only 4. Houston and Chicago. Then Los Angeles, 3 million, 3.8 million as a matter of fact. That's, of course, the second biggest. And after that, all bets off forever because New York City has 8.8 million people in it. It, of course, is the largest city in the country. I don't think we're going to get there. And who knows whether we survive as a country if we get there. I mean, that's just crazy. Anyway, so next direction for the last half hour of the show. I don't know. I say maybe we take a look at this AT&T thing. We've just been talking about it too much. And I think we need more than half an hour. Plus, we also need the weekend to fully digest what's going on in the Senate report and analyzing what might come next. So, Reuters and their special report, how AT&T helped build far-right One America News. Don't know if we can get all the way through it, even in a half an hour, but we'll kick off the weekend by making our best attempt at it. Wow, I guess this counts as a subheader down here. As it lauded former President Donald Trump and spread his unfounded claims of election fraud, and don't forget about COVID, One America News Network saw its viewership jump. Reuters has uncovered how America's telecom giant nurtured the news channel, now at the center of a bitter national divide over politics and truth. This is John Schiffman reporting for Reuters. And I was wondering, even before I begin, I think AT&T, as I mentioned yesterday, owns DirecTV. And I did notice, flipping around the channel guide, that One America News Network, I don't know whether they go by OAN or OANN, but One America News is on the DirecTV channel lineup. And, I mean, that by itself is a huge boost from, I guess, parent company AT&T. But I understand that there's even more to the relationship than that. And not only that, but that this long story that we won't get through, especially if I don't start, is only the first of 2 stories. So I guess we'll wait and see what comes up. Maybe that will consume part of our weekend as well. One America News, the far-right network whose fortunes and viewership rose amid the triumph and tumult of the Trump administration, has flourished with support from a surprising source, AT&T Incorporated, the world's largest communications company. A Reuters review of court records shows the role AT&T played in creating and funding OAN, a network that continues to spread conspiracy theories about the 2020 election and the COVID-19 pandemic. See, John didn't forget the COVID-19 pandemic. But yeah, even just, like I said, just the choice to put them in the lineup, it gave them life. I mean, if they are just people pointing video cameras at places and then putting it on the internet, they're nothing. Not that that prevents Donald Trump from adopting them as official news outlet anyway and just directing people to their website. But this made a big difference. There's still a lot of people that don't consume their news on the internet. When it comes to, video news style stuff, they tend to want to turn on the TV. OAN founder and chief executive Robert Herring Sr. has testified that the inspiration to launch OAN in 2013 came from AT&T executives. That's weird. They told us they wanted a conservative network, Herring said during a 2019 deposition seen by Reuters. They only had one, which was Fox News, and they had 7 others on the brackets left-wing side. So they inserted the word left-wing. I don't know what was there originally. Maybe nothing, the other side. And no, they don't have 7 on the left-wing side, but whatever. When they said that, I jumped to it and built one. Since then, AT&T has been a crucial source of funds flowing into OAN, providing tens of millions of dollars in revenue, court records show. 90% of OAN's revenue came from a contract with AT&T-owned television platforms, including the satellite broadcaster DirecTV, according to 2020 sworn testimony by an OAN accountant. Herring has testified he was offered $250 million for OAN in 2019. Without the DirecTV deal, the accountant said under oath the network's value would be $0. Aha. Dallas-based AT&T, a mobile phone and internet provider, also owns entertainment giant Warner Media, which includes CNN and HBO. Yuck. AT&T acquired DirecTV in 2015 and in August spun off the satellite service, retaining a 70% share in the new independently managed company. AT&T's total U.S. television subscriber base, including satellite and streaming services, fell from 26 million in 2015 to 15.4 million as of August. AT&T spokesman Jim Greer declined to comment on the testimony about OAN's revenue streams, citing confidentiality agreements. He said that DirecTV broadcasts, quote, many news channels that offer viewpoints across the political spectrum. We have always sought to provide a wide variety of content and programming that would be of interest to customers and do not dictate or control programming on channels we carry, Greer said. Any suggestion otherwise is wrong. We'll see. After the story was published, AT&T issued a statement saying it has, quote, never had a financial interest in OAN's success and does not, quote, fund OAN. Although the contracts are confidential, in court filings, Herring cited monthly fees included in one 5-year deal with AT&T. According to an AT&T filing citing Herring's numbers, those fees would total about $57 million. Greer said that figure is inaccurate, but declined to say how much AT&T has paid to air OAN, citing a non-disclosure agreement. Herring and his adult sons own and operate OAN, a subsidiary of their closely held San Diego-based Herring Networks. Their AT&T deal includes Herring's other network, a little-watched lifestyle channel, AWE. I don't know whether people say aw or what, but it's listed here as AWE. The Herrings declined interview requests. Herring, who just turned 80, is a self-made businessman, whatever that really means, who amassed a fortune in the circuit board industry, then turned to television and boxing promotion. Weird. But then I realized all of a sudden as I said that, as weird as that is, what did Donald Trump and Donald Trump Jr., I think, just spend their 9/11 20th anniversary day doing? And it was commentating on a boxing match, a pay-per-view boxing match. Was it a Herring promoted boxing match? Probably. I don't know, though. OAN's influence rose in late 2015 when it began covering Trump rallies live, at a time when some of the media still saw the New York celebrity businessman as a long-shot presidential contender. The network continues to shower Trump with attention and often provides a friendly platform for his Republican allies. And I guess they're responsible for the weird habit that grew out of the spectacle that was a Trump event, because you never know what he's going to say or what kind of dumb crap is going to come out of his mouth. But I guess everybody wanted to see that dumb crap, and they found out about OAN's existence, and they flipped the channel there to find out what was going on, and can I see some of this dumb stuff live? And then everybody else said, we need to get in on this. And then he became president. Thanks a lot. As president, Trump frequently urged supporters to watch OAN. In his final 2 years in office, Trump touted the network known as @OANN online, I guess via Twitter, to his 88 million Twitter followers at least 120 times. Hope everybody is watching, yes, @OANN. Forget the @ already. Hope everybody's watching OANN right now, Trump tweeted on December 1st, citing a dubious report about a truck carrying more than 100,000 fake ballots. Other media afraid to show. And I mean, here you get to see, in case you're not familiar with it, the quantum difference between OAN and everything else. And the idea that AT&T is just innocently carrying it as a news network and saying, we don't dictate content. It's not a news network. This stuff isn't news. It's fake crap. What are you doing? I mean, do I get to start a fantasy channel too? No, because there's already 7 of them. Like, okay, sure. My complete nonsense fantasy channel is the same thing as ABC News. Right. But in AT&T's mind, apparently that's the case. The state and federal court documents reviewed by Reuters detail a lucrative relationship for OAN with AT&T, even as the two occasionally tangled in court. The records include a reported offer by AT&T to acquire a 5% equity stake in OAN and AWE, though the two sides ultimately signed a different deal. The court filings also cite a promise by OAN to, quote, cast a positive light, unquote, on AT&T during newscasts. More indication that they're not a news channel. The confidential OAN financial records are drawn in part from testimony, including by Herring and the accountant, generated during a labor lawsuit, brought against OAN by a former employee and unrelated to AT&T. When that case went to trial last year, the network's lawyer told the jury that AT&T was keeping OAN afloat. They wanted to go after the bigger pockets. If Herring Networks, for instance, was to lose or not be renewed on DirecTV, the company would go out of business tomorrow, OAN lawyer Patrick Nellies told the court. A transcript shows researchers who tracked the rise of conservative media pillars Rush Limbaugh and Fox News see similarities between those pioneers to One American News and other new right-wing networks, particularly during their formative years. Kathleen Hall Jamieson, we've heard her name before, director of the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania, said the births of Fox News and OAN share common threads, money and opportunity. She noted that the late Republican operative Roger Ailes, may he burn in hell, had the foresight in the 1990s to recommend that Fox create a conservative news network. If somebody recognizes there's a market for something and there's a lot of money attached to that market, you get a news outlet, Jameson said. So this is AT&T playing the Roger Ailes role. I think that seems very clear. And it wasn't so much that they felt like, gosh, we only have one conservative news network, because they had Fox News, Fox News Channel, Fox Business Channel, the regular Fox network stations from around, local stations from around the country, although they're not nearly as conservative as the cable channels. So at the minimum, it's 2. And CNBC is no slouch either when it comes to, conservative economics anyhow. And they used it to launch the Tea Party just fine, right? So anyway, it's not that it's 1 to 7. At worst, it's 2 or 3 to 6. I don't know what they counted CNBC as. But A, who cares? And B, basically this was, well, what we're really seeing is that one station that we do have that's considered conservative. We carry it, but we only get, we get, I don't know, I guess they, do they get paid when they carry it on, or is it the other, do they pay for carrying it? I think they pay to carry it, as a matter of fact. Well, if you wanted another news network that, 1, you could control, and 2, you could profit from, they saw that Fox was making a mint. They said, why don't we make a mint too? And instead of having to pay, I guess they're going to continue to have to pay them to use their channel and put it on their lineup, but they wouldn't have to have the same relationship with OAN necessarily. All right, let me continue on with what's actually reported here. Right. If somebody recognizes there's a market out there, you're gonna fill it, right? So this is AT&T playing the Roger Ailes role. Greer, the AT&T spokesman, called that comparison a ridiculous claim, noting that other distributors also carry OAN, but that's their problem. Anyway, America's post-election turmoil, punctuated by the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, continues to roil the country. Dozens of election administrators in battleground states Trump lost have received a barrage of death threats, Reuters has reported. That's certainly true. A Reuters poll in May showed that a quarter of Americans and 53% of Republicans wrongly believe Trump won the 2020 election. OAN caters to this audience. Trump's loss was OAN's gain, social media data show. The network's online audience soared in November after conservative mainstay and OAN competitor Fox News affirmed Joe Biden's victory. They told the truth, so everybody migrated to OAN. Trump and his camp blasted Fox. A record 767,000 people installed the OAN app that month, 9 times as many as in October, according to data firm Sensor Tower. In January, Trump supporters, including at least one carrying an OAN flag, stormed the U.S. Capitol. That month, app installations spiked again to 517,000. And, of course, the ability to install an app that's dedicated to airing OAN content on your phone or laptop or whatever is a pretty good substitute for being able to find it on the TV. Most people, if they've got a smartphone and know how to use it, can access the content that way. So it doesn't even really have to be carried on TV anymore, which is, good business decision for them. Terrible for the country, but good business decision. The OAN website averages 8 million visits a month from desktop and mobile users, having peaked at 15 million from November through January. Data firm SimilarWeb found in an analysis for Reuters. 2 in 3 people on desktop computers returned to the website after an initial visit, about the same loyalty rate as Fox News and Newsmax, another rival conservative news channel, which, by the way, probably also in the DirecTV lineup, and so their count is wrong again. One America's television ratings are harder to measure, partly because it is available in only about a quarter of the estimated 121 million TV households in the United States. Ratings service Nielsen and ComScore both show that Fox continues to be a leading cable network, but do not release OAN figures. In an internal email, an OAN news director told staff that the week of the Capitol assault produced the network's best ever ratings, but gave no statistics. OAN says it's the 4th-rated news network behind Fox, CNN, and MSNBC, and ahead of CNBC, the BBC, and Newsmax, but has not provided figures to back that up. Each of these networks, including One America News, pays Reuters fees to publish the news service's stories, videos, and or pictures. So some full disclosure there. Even so, the numbers of viewers OAN reaches may be less important than the kind of observers it attracts and galvanizes, said John Watson, an American University journalism professor specializing in ethics and media law. If you have 12 Americans being fed a diet of untruth, that's 12 too many. And here, it's literally millions, Watson said of the OAN audience. That's a good point. When you have that sort of poisonous influence on mass media, it's a problem. Because elections in the United States tend to be so close, a few percentage points here or there can really make a difference. At least one self-described regular OAN viewer recently sent a threatening note to an election official. In August, Sheila Garcia of Riverside County, California, sent Colorado Secretary of State Jenna Griswold a scathing message. Biden beat Trump in Colorado, and Garcia accused Griswold, the state's top election official, of treason, warning her that punishments for that crime are hanging and lethal injection. Within several months, you will have to decide between the two. It's not really up to you, I don't think. Garcia wrote. In an interview, Griswold said she considered threats like Garcia's message a credible threat on her life. That threat and dozens of others caused her to seek extra security measures, she said. Garcia, 55, told Reuters she is convinced Biden stole the election and said she gets most of her news from OAN. She compared U.S. mainstream media to state propaganda outlets in China and Cuba, which is what most people would say about OAN, of course. Her message to Griswold, she said, was legal. If you're afraid of a little old lady in a trailer park in California, I feel sorry for you, she said in an interview. But, threatening to murder people is bad. Sorry. Neil W. McCabe, OAN's former Washington bureau chief and now national political correspondent for the Tennessee Star, rejects the idea that the network is a toxic influence. Well, you're wrong. He said OAN serves an important public role and has earned loyalty from viewers who share a similar worldview. That's not actually like a good metric, but whatever. When you give a voice to the voiceless, you're going to bond with them, McCabe told Reuters. Who else is doing these stories? By the way, Tennessee Star, get rid of this guy immediately. He's crazy. In several instances, records show, the network broadcast statements and theories that were proven false. YouTube suspended OAN from making money off of its YouTube channel for last year for, among other things, repeatedly violating its COVID-19 policy, which prohibits content claiming there's a guaranteed cure. OAN touts hydroxychloroquine, amazingly enough, an anti-malarial drug promoted by Trump without scientific evidence as a cure for COVID. During last summer's Black Lives Matter protests, OAN aired an unconfirmed report that an elderly demonstrator in Buffalo, New York, who was knocked down and seriously injured by police, was trying to jam the cops' radios. Trump, citing the OAN story, tweeted that the man, quote, could be an Antifa provocateur. Somebody had to spell that one for him, I'm sure. The false accusation went viral. In the 2 days after the OAN broadcast, 1/3 of all online references cited the network, an analysis compiled by Signal Labs for Reuters found. On January 6th, after Trump supporters broke into the U.S. Capitol, an OAN news director cautioned staff via email, please do not say Trump supporters storm Capitol. Simply call them demonstrators or protesters. Do not call it a riot. 3 exclamation points. A day later, Herring suggested the riot might be a false flag operation by the left-wing Antifa movement. We want to report all the things Antifa did yesterday. I don't think it was Trump people, but let's investigate. He emailed OAN producers. The Federal Bureau of Investigation says there is no evidence of Antifa involvement in the riot. All but a handful of the some 600 suspects charged so far have been right-wing Trump backers. The next day, Herring tweeted, if anyone thinks we will throw the best president America has had in my 79 years under the bus, you are wrong. We will continue to give him honest coverage. Sure. His network went on to support Trump in an unusual way. OAN allowed 2 reporters to raise $605,000 to help fund a, quote, private audit, they really should have quoted audit, of the presidential vote in Arizona. The very one we talk about all the time, despite Republican officials' assurances that Biden won the state. According to an OAN executive, they did so with the network's blessing, but in a private capacity. One of the OAN reporters, Christina Bobb, also worked part-time for the Trump recount legal team, according to a recent deposition by Trump's then lawyer, Rudolph Giuliani. An OAN executive confirmed the arrangement. Bob, a lawyer and a former Trump administration official, did not reply to a request for comment. 5 former OAN producers said in interviews that they found the practice of reporters raising funds for events that they cover unethical, but said OAN's move did not surprise them. If there was any story involving Trump, we had to only focus on either the positive information or basically create positive information, said Marissa Gonzalez, an OAN producer from 2019 until she resigned in 2020. It was never the full truth. I guess some people actually joined the network thinking it was a real job. Since March, OAN has sold hours of infomercial time to MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell, a leading purveyor of false claims the election was stolen. Lindell has used that time on OAN to repeatedly broadcast his election conspiracy, quote, docu-movies. A primary Lindell target is Dominion Voting Systems Incorporated, whose machines count votes in 28 states and use paper ballots and records for auditing. In August, Dominion sued OAN, of course, for defamation. OAN saw a business opportunity and fueled bogus conspiracies about alleged vote tampering, Dominion contended. OAN helped create and cultivate an alternate reality where up is down and pigs have wings, the lawsuit said. The network's lawyers have said in letters to Dominion that the election coverage is protected free speech, and that the Lindell programs include a disclaimer that they are opinions only and not to be intended to be taken or interpreted by the viewer as established facts. Other Trump supporters, including Lindell and lawyers Giuliani and Sidney Powell, offered a similar free speech defense in related lawsuits brought by Dominion. In August, the federal judge said the Lindell, Giuliani, and Powell cases should proceed toward trial, noting that the Constitution does not necessarily offer blanket immunity for statements that are political in nature. And of course, you may have heard Dominion is having tremendous success in prosecuting those cases. All right, we're out of time now for the rest of the story, but the next section seems to be of the most interest. Maybe you'll want to read it over the weekend. AT&T and OAN, the origin story. I'm glad it's available to us. And this is only part one of two-part story, apparently. I don't know when the second part comes out in Reuters. I'll have to check. Maybe we'll make that a topic for discussion next week. In the meantime, time now to turn things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And what have we missed that he'll be covering? Let's see. High-ranking government officials acquiesced to Trump's illegal pressure to overturn the election, raising the question of how Attorney General Merrick Garland will hold those officials accountable. Let's find out who next.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Other good news, President Biden will restore 3 national monuments that were capriciously cut by Trump. One of the wacko Josephine County, Oregon County Commissioners, didn't even know there were any, said to ask God about COVID-19 vaccinations because you can't trust doctors. Does sound pretty wacky. Hear about it next.